Hello and welcome to Property Mastermind Podcast, episode 144. Today, we are talking important considerations for your property development success. It's a fab episode where we unpack a few things that you really need to consider when undergoing property development, whether it be your first, second, third, fourth, or fifth. These are all always vital considerations. So let's jump into episode 144. Hey, welcome to episode 144, and we are talking considerations for success in property development, and it's going to be a fab episode. But before we start, welcome, Bob.
Yeah, great. Good to be here.
Good to be here, take two.
Yeah. Well, tech issues, what do you do?
No, we do a whole podcast, and then we found out that there was a tech issue and there was no sound.
Yeah.
So we had to do this one a second time, but
luckily we enjoy doing podcasts so much.
Well, it gave us a little bit of time to reflect on how we could do it better, which is something that I always like to do in life. Hey,
what, do things better?
Yeah, just
or reflect.
Yeah, reflect back and think that could have been better because of this or whatever. So that's always a good thing.
Yeah.
And what's your tip for the week, Bob?
Oh, my tip for the week. Well, I always tend to go around fishing, isn't it? Because that's what I think about a lot when I'm not thinking about property, being a hobby. Don't cross a bar in a strong southeasterly, which would only mean something to people that probably have a boat and may occasionally
and have to cross a bar.
Occasionally cross a bar, yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll just park that one.
We'll park
we had a bit of a horrific experience.
That's a story for when we catch up with some of you people somewhere.
For the next workshop, Bob.
Next workshop, okay. There's a tale there.
Okay, that's when October 11, 12, 13, 10, 11, 12.
Yeah.
24.
Okay. So when I got more time and I'm with you and we get a group of people around and maybe a glass of something to drink, I'll tell you the story.
The story of how we're lucky to be here. And yeah, that was a bit of a crazy one. But today we're talking about considerations. Actually, I need to look up the title again because I wrote it down and now I actually can't remember. I know what we're talking about. Important considerations. Exactly. Important considerations for property development, which also leads me to, it's really important considerations in life. And I think you can apply most of these to your life in some way. So whether you're listening to this for property development, but you might be able to swing this over to perhaps your career or maybe to your relationship or maybe your health. All of these things, they work together. Don't they, really?
Yeah, there's common ground. What we're going to talk about in other facets of life.
Yeah, so use it for property development or another area of your life if you have something you'd not like to have a wee look at. Anyway, Bob, question number one for you is risk management in property development. I would like to sort of understand the way or the value of importance you give it, maybe the way you approach it. Yeah, I think we'll go there.
It's the way that we approach risk in life because we face risk every day. I mean, we don't think about it because we've already mitigated against it. But think of driving.
We put safety belts on.
We put safety belts on. We get a license. First of all, we learn how to drive. We get a license. We learn the rules.
We abide by the rules.
Hopefully.
Most.
Don't speed, stop at the red lights, drive on the left-hand side of the road if you're in Australia. All these things. Very dangerous, 2 tons of steel flying down the highway at 100 kilometres an hour, 2 tons flying in the other direction. I mean, that's pretty disastrous when they meet. So that's a big risk. I mean, that's a life and death risk, just driving a car.
Yes.
But why don't we panic every time we hop in the car? Why don't we just say, I'm not driving a car? Well, because we understand the risks and we've mitigated against those risks.
It's a great word, mitigate, Bob. What does it even mean?
Well, we've put things in place to overcome the risk.
Okay, mitigated means that. I use it, but
so now we're comfortable. So we don't think about it. When we hop in our car, we're probably thinking about where we're going, what we'll do when we get there. But we're not terrified of what could potentially happen out there because we know the risks, we've identified the risks, and we've mitigated the risk. So there's risks in many things. So what about property? Well, is there a risk in, let's start at the bottom, property investment? Yes, there is, particularly if you play the short game. But if you think about property being a good investment in the long term, the longer you own it, the safer it is. If you're trying to, buy a property and flick it in 6 months, that's going to be very much driven on the market and what's happening. So So there's risk there. But in property development, sure, there's risks. And we have to understand what the risks are and how we mitigate against those risks. And look, there's things we can't control. But one of the obvious ones is if we're going to do a property development, first of all, get educated. We've heard us say that 100 times. That's really important. Get yourself educated. But beyond that, what's happening in property development and what can we really do about it? And a lot of it comes, and I'll pick a few things in isolation in a moment, but one of the best things you'll ever do in property development is get a really good team around you. Now, whether that team is an advisor, a mentor, but beyond that, have a really good lawyer, have a good accountant who understands property and structures.
Oh, can I interrupt there?
Yeah.
Have a good accountant that understands property and structures, but also understands property development and doesn't want to squash your dream, whether you are an investor or a developer, because they don't understand it. And I think that that's a vital one.
Yeah. And my last two go-to accountants for property development structures are both involved in developments.
Yes.
So that says a lot. But, beyond that, architects, engineers, get a really good team around you, and town planners and valuers and all those sorts of people eventually. But what you're doing is you need to get immersed in property development. So you need to discuss things with those that are knowledgeable, and they're probably only knowledgeable in their own particular area. As a developer, we have to be knowledgeable over a whole range of things. So if you're talking to a valuer about something, what sort of valuations you're doing lately. Have you noticed you're doing more in a certain area? Who are the lenders you're valuing for? All those sorts of things you might talk to a valuer about. They're experts in that area, but don't take them out of that area. So good advice, good team, really important. But let's just have a look at a few of the things that you can't control. Now, you can't control interest rates.
No.
They are what they are. And we've seen, I've seen rapid rise. When I say rapid rise in interest rates, over a period of 12, 13, 14 months, we saw 13 small increases that add up. And so interest rates are now higher than they were 2 years ago. But they were never going to be as low as they were. They were low for a particular reason. So everybody should have known, well, they're going to go up at some point and go back to what would be the long-term average. And that's what they've done. But it does have an effect on your numbers. We've seen, but that's not something you can control. But if you think about property development being a short-term thing, then it has less effect on a short-term development than it would on a long-term investment hold. But it's only back to where it would have been, probably without COVID. Other things, councils. Well, some councils are pro-development, some are not so.
Would you suggest then, Bob, that when you're looking to develop, you actually research the council if you know that they're a little bit anti-development or they're going to make things difficult? Would you count that as a risk that you look into and go, actually, I won't bother here because it's just too much hassle?
Well, it might steer me not to do something there. And that could be, like I said before, talking to people, talking to town planners, talking to other developers, people within our community in the city where you live, let's say, because there are some councils that it's just going to be a hard thing, not to say you won't get approvals. They can't knock back everything, but it's going to be a bit of a grind, and it might take longer than another council that's more proactive, more pro-development. Now, you can't control what happens in council, but there's things you can do about before you go to council, and even having...
Like pre-lodgements?
Well, perhaps pre-lodgement, but at least having an application that has a very strong chance of success, and maybe not trying to push the boundaries too much. I mean, there's things you can control, there's things you can't control with council, but your application and what it looks like, you can control. But just the market, what I talk about the market, I'm talking about how the market's always dynamic, it's fluid, it's moving. And we have times when properties go up in value, which is most of the time. But then we have times when properties aren't doing much in terms of growth. I'm talking about going up in value. And then we often have times when they go backwards a little bit. Normally when they go backwards, it's off the back of a pretty good strong rise. So if property values went up, 30% over a period of time, and they got a bit overheated and it corrected and it went back 5%, it's still a net plus 25 over however length of time. So we know that properties do go up in the long run.
So, Bob, when you're talking about that and being that's a statement. But as far as risk mitigation, how does that apply to risk mitigation?
Well, I suppose trying to understand the market, the movements in the market and where it's going. And in our last podcast, I think it was, we talked about, where we see property development going in 2024. So we have an opinion. And it's based around things like, without repeating the last podcast, interest rates. Well, they've pretty much run their race. They're pretty much done and dusted. So I don't expect much in terms of interest rates going up, if at all. So we can sort of base things on that. We know that there's an undersupply nationally of dwellings, a big undersupply, and it's getting worse. The undersupply is getting worse, which is a good thing for property developers. And so what we've seen is a drop in building approvals, which means there's going to be less things built in the next 1 to 2 years. But we've seen a very strong desire for property, if you like. The supply demand is low, but the big requirement is for properties. And we've seen it's not just organic growth, and that drives values a lot, but we've seen overseas migration, which was held back for years with COVID. The last 2 years, 200,000 each year. And I've heard this year it's going to be over 300,000 international, overseas migrants coming into Australia.
Bob, this
is understanding the market, the drivers.
You made a point there about doing that research and understanding what's going on, but who do you listen to? Because you
be careful who you listen to.
I know, because you just said it's based on opinion, and some people are very opinionated, but just because somebody's loud and opinionated does not mean they necessarily know what they're talking about. No. And this is take 2 of this podcast. This wasn't in the last one, but when Bob talks like this, I think I actually put myself in the shoes of the people that I know who listen, and often it's people new to property development or people passionate about it, and there's a trust here that they're listening to someone who knows what they're talking about after 40 years, so it's not a plug. But
no.
Who do you listen to?
It's not your mate down at the pub. No. I mean, you've got to look at where you take information from. What are they? What have they done? What are their credentials? I mean, if you're going to learn property development, learn off someone who's done quite a bit of it. And that's not a plug for us. There's other people out there.
But the opinion on
and same with
rates.
Opinions. I'm saying that. Yeah. Who would understand that? Well, you've got to understand the drivers behind the interest rates. And the big driver, because interest rates are driven by the RBA, the driver has always been get inflation back. Get it, 3% or less. 2 to 3 is the target. And so inflation is starting to decline. But there's still a couple of big drivers there: house values, fuel, for one, and food. So it's very slow to decline, but it is it's sort of under control. What the RBA look a lot at is unemployment, or I should say employment, and that's still very strong. Unemployment rate has actually dipped again. It's almost back to 2023 levels, about 3.7% in February. So that's what they watch. But if there is one more 25 basis point move upwards, there mightn't be. I don't know. I really don't care, because that's so insignificant. I don't really care about 0.25% as a property developer. There's other things. And we've seen rapid rises in build costs, but that's all levelled out a lot. One of the builders we use hasn't put his prices up in 6 months. And, some of the big quantity surveyors firms, Mitchell Brantman to name one, they're talking about a 4% increase over a year. So that's pretty much under control. So that's about understanding the market and taking advice, from the right people, and just really seeing what's going on out there. There's some people that I particularly follow whose opinion I respect in economics, around growth and interest rates and that sort of thing. So that's what you need to do, and the bigger picture.
So when we're talking about mitigating risk, and this is something that that really, as the word, it not fires me up, it really makes me think about property development. It's a word. The word risk is often put with property development, and you started this first question off with there's risk everywhere, getting in your car to drive, and because it's a normal thing to do, we don't consider it risky. But there are so many things that are risky, but for some reason when it comes to property development, the word risk gets planted in there. Bob, who did that?
Oh, well, I mean, there are risks, but like, find me something that's not risky.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So why is there such a close association or close connection to the word risk with property development?
Well, I think because we're creating something that doesn't yet exist.
Right.
So we're going to do a duplex, let's say. Well, when we start, it doesn't exist. the first thing we'll do in terms of not something really active is to buy a development site where we can do it. But we haven't got an approval yet. We haven't got a building contract. We haven't built it and we haven't sold it. So it's something that doesn't exist. If you look at something like buying an investment property, it does exist. It's there. It may be rented. If it's an investment, you might be buying it, to live in. It doesn't matter. At least it's there. So that's a lower level of risk.
Right.
But then a much lower level of return. Like if you think you're going to buy enough investment properties as a normal worker to retire really easily, when you retire, very few people ever go past one investment property. The number of people that own 3 investment properties, let alone 3 investment properties outright by the time they retire, is minuscule. And you'd need at least 3 investment properties debt-free where you're just living off the rent to even have half a life, I reckon.
And I like that, I reckon. And even when you talk about investment property, sometimes people buy an investment property within a few months, it is decreased in value because that can happen in some areas, but they never look at it like it had that level of risk. And I'm not dissing investing because I started off doing that and I invest still now, but we just don't associate that risk with it.
No, we're big property investors, but we develop our properties so that we're getting them at absolute cost price. We're not paying retail. So a typical, if you were doing a few townhouses, let's take a number. Let's say they're worth $600,000 when you finish. As a developer, typically they'll cost you about $500,000. So you got that $100,000 gap straight away on the market.
So if they were 1.2 million, which is probably a bit more close,
all right, 1 million.
You're going to get.
They'll cost you $1 million.
Yeah, $1 million. Yeah,
and you make $200,000 a townhouse. So that's a good buffer as well for a developer. We start off $200,000 in front on $1 million property.
Yeah.
And if we do 3 of them, we're starting $600,000 in front. That's why you can own lots of investment properties if you develop and create at cost. That's a benefit. But the other, in terms of mismitigation.
Say that again, Bob.
Try that risk mitigation.
Mitigation.
It's good to have that buffer. Not to say you're dealing with things on the way through. Of course you can, and that's where experience. That's where having somebody beside you who's done it 100 times, or get yourself educated, whatever it is. Not just head out and think, I'll do it on the hoof. There's enough information for free on the internet. I'll get there. Don't worry. She'll be right, mate. I'll get there. That's not how you approach property development.
I remember a while ago we had a couple of young guys ring and they were inquiring about our courses, etc. And they told us of their development and the profit margin they had. And straight away we knew the area and we both thought, oh my gosh, these guys have got no idea. They were so out, weren't they? And there was an arrogance about their outness as well, because I think they even came to the workshop. They didn't take any notes. They didn't even open the workbook. They just sat there and I thought, oh my goodness. So it is kind of a little bit of
if you put the blinkers on,
there's
only one way to go.
Yeah, you've got to take the blinkers off and just be realistic about it, eh? Yeah. Okay, question 2.
I'm done with risk.
Mitigation.
That's almost a podcast in itself.
It is. We've gone on. I was a little bit of a soapbox movement there. I was like, Bob.
The last thing I spoke about was market risk.
Yeah.
And that's movements in the market. Properties going up. Like I said before, they'll go up for a longer period of time than they'll ever correct and go down a bit, and they only ever go down a bit compared to how much they go up. Otherwise, properties wouldn't increase in value, and we know they do. But just understanding market movements and what part of the market we're in, and that's what we said in our last podcast. We're very happy with the market at the moment where it's going.
Very happy for many aspects of property development, which brings me to my next question, Bob, around diversification. Around development diversification, and we've just started talking about the fact that we've started our latest project underway. Like we've just completed NDIS, we've got the retirement village underway, we've got a duplex underway, and now the industrial units. So that's a massive diversification. But we've also diversified in areas. We've got Western Australia, New South Wales, Queensland.
You just finished something in Victoria.
Yeah, and Victoria. So there's
so diverse, 4 states.
Yeah, the 4 states, the many different types of development, and even when we look at residential versus commercial, you can break all of. Well, I've just spoken of a couple of commercial, and we can break residential down into duplex, 4-packs, 3s, whatever. 6s or 7s, 9s apartments. So, Bob, how do you feel? What's your opinion on the importance of diversification? Firstly, within product. And secondly, within area. So we'll start with product. And then area.
Okay.
Or location.
Look, most of us start off doing residential developments because we're comfortable with it. We live in a house. We might own an investment property. It's something that we understand. And most people these days are quite intelligent about property investment. And they understand how that works. So obviously, the next step up could be renos, or the next step up again could be property development. But there's no reason why you can't go straight from zero to property development. That's what I did, and we've seen a number of people do that. And you can. So in terms of residential, that's where we often start, it's what we're comfortable with. And we normally start small, which makes sense. And small could be something like a 2-lot subdivision. Perhaps you'll build a couple of houses on those 2 lots. Could be a duplex. Could be a dual occupancy where you might keep an existing house. You might build in the backyard. Or it could be a small townhouse development, maybe 3, maybe 4. So that's typically where we go. And we always advocate having a patch, don't we? So we're talking about select an area, become the expert, so you really understand a deal when you see one. And look, you might start off with a duplex, let's say, and that's good product, good thing to do. There's only 2, you only have to sell 2, readily financed if you've got your good margin in there. But it doesn't mean they'll work forever in that area. And so it might be that you might need to change your product, or you might need to change your area. So just within the residential area, you might, and I've seen this, I've seen places where, particularly after COVID, where house values went up so much, but townhouses and apartment values didn't go up as much as houses, where you actually might have a site, could be an 800-metre site that you could do 4 townhouses on, but you actually made more money by just subdividing that site into 2 lots and building 2 houses. You made more money out of doing that than doing 4 townhouses, because houses values went up, and that's what you're creating is houses. Townhouse values didn't go up nearly as much at the time. This is correcting in the market, and some places it's already corrected, others it's well on its way, where townhouses are now coming back, because there's always a relationship between a new house and a new townhouse in the same area. So that's a diversification of product for a reason of it's simply more profitable now in that area than it was previously. And we might change locations. We develop interstate, and some other people do. If things are really moving in another city and they're not moving in yours, could you or should you develop in that other city?
As a newbie, Bob, what are your recommendations there? Better to start closer to home, or does not really matter?
Well, in the long run, it doesn't matter, but it is easier. I mean, I often say to people, the easiest development you'll ever do is develop your next door neighbour's property, because you'll know it back to front, inside out. You know the market, you live there, and
you can watch it.
Logistically, you can watch it and walk there in like 5 seconds. But that's unlikely to happen. So start close to where you live, but it might be that that's not profitable enough at the moment where you particularly live, and you might need to go further afield in the city where you live, or sometimes even interstate, and that's no big deal. But diversification of product could even be in the residential area, a diversification. Like I said, 2-lot subbies, 2 houses, duplex, 3 townhouses, that sort of thing. Diversification of product. Some work better in other areas than they might work. Duplexes might stop working in one area, but they might be working in another area. And you've got to be aware of that. So diversification of product also. Residential, we've dealt with residential. What about commercial? Now, we don't talk a lot or teach commercial development. We have taught people within our mentoring program who definitely wanted to do commercial development, and we've obviously helped them go through their commercial developments, but it's not part of what we normally teach because most people are comfortable with resi. It's where you start. But the markets aren't always in sync. So just because the resi market's going well doesn't mean, for instance, the industrial market's going really well. They can be out of cycle because they're driven by different things. And so sometimes if the resi market's a bit quiet where you are, maybe not far away, the industrial market could be going really well. And we're not talking about giant sheds and, tens of millions of dollars worth of development. Industrial could be right down to, basically house size industrial and upwards. I just chose industrial. Could be retail.
Well, even when you said that, I was just thinking of a photographer that we sometimes use. He's just got a huge big unit, basically. It's an industrial unit. He just happens to own his.
Yeah.
That's his it has studio and it's huge, but it's like a huge industrial unit, like an office out the side.
Yeah.
And almost like those man sheds they call them, don't they?
And we know another photographer who operates out of a house that has a business zoning. And often that's the case where you're close to shopping centres, is that the surrounding houses have a business zoning that you can use for business. And you often find accountants and solicitors, in this case photographers, who work out of those. So commercial isn't big city high-rise office blocks.
Not always. It can be.
No,
it can be whatever.
But there are different drivers in that market, and it's not. You can't just jump from residential, say, into industrial, unless you've got somebody with a lot of experience to hold your hand on that, or you do the hard yards, do the research, and learn more about it. But that's a diversification of product beyond just residential.
And I'm always looking for investors for our next one, which is pretty close. Just thought I'd throw that in. Yeah. I can't help myself.
And with some of the residential, with some of the industrial or commercial developments that are a little bit larger, you might need to joint venture with a few other people, or come in, as you just talked about.
Yeah, because there's
into a group that's
larger
that's
amount
doing
of money
a development
that's needed. To get started.
I mean, you can often get into those sorts of developments as an investor with probably $250,000. Whereas it'll take a lot more than that to do the whole project.
Yeah, close to a couple of million, really.
Yeah,
mostly.
yeah. So could be.
But some people have a couple of million.
Could be a syndicate, something like that, which we do.
So the question I really started with, Bob, is how important is diversification? So
I think even if you don't look beyond residential, I think you need to be aware of how your market's performing and how it's going, and be prepared to either change locality, if need be, or even look at changing product. And I'm just kept it pretty simple when I talk about land subdivisions, build houses on it, duplexes, dual occupies, or small townhouse developments. And that's all residential, so you don't have to learn new stuff much.
No. Okay, Bob, I've got one more question, because I'm aware that you had plans to do with fishing this afternoon.
Oh, well, this is more important.
Yeah. My last question is long-term strategic planning. As far as property development success, can I start on this one?
I know.
Okay.
You're good at this.
So, I suppose that's why, because as soon as it comes to planning, my brain just goes there, because planning to me is everything. CBA, be clear about what you want, believe it's possible, and take the actions. But it starts with being clear about what you want. And so when it comes to strategic planning, I think often we get new developers who come to us, or new time developing, maybe they've come from investing, and they want a strategic plan, which is a fantastic idea, because it's that difference between the coach and the mentor. The mentor looks back and says, okay, this is what you want. Well, we need to start moving in this direction. There's conversations on the way. It's a smoother ride, I believe, because you're in consultation really with somebody heading toward their end goal, which is more than just, I want to have, it encompasses a lot of things, I think. So when we look at strategic planning, usually there's a bigger goal at play, and it might mean retirement for, if I 35, 40, 50, whatever that is for you. It might mean happily married with 3 children. I get to take them to school like you took your kids to school, so you didn't have to have an 8-to-5 job. So the strategic plan around what it is you would like to achieve, more of a bird's eye view of the whole journey with the result in mind, versus the actual, all right, let's get a development underway, let's go do that. And I think that it's important to have one, but when it comes to doing your first development, you end up focusing on that first one so intensely, because you need to understand it all, and you realize the time that's involved in getting started. And if you don't get started, you'll never do anything. So I believe that it's important to have a strategic goal and an overview of a strategic plan to get there, but the focus, as the old saying goes, where focus goes, energy flows, needs to go to the development. What do you think about that? Did that make sense? I know it
did to me, because I've heard you say it many times.
Because I believe in it.
Yeah. And you're right. I often like to know people's why. Like they say, okay, I want to get into property development. I want to be a property developer, and I like to say why. And it's different why for different people, obviously. I mean, it's quite a few people aren't in love with their day job, and then so they'd like to get to a point where they can make well, first of all, a lot more money than they make in their day job, but also toss the day job and do property development as their primary source of income. That's often a why. You know, they could be fly-in, fly-outs. They could just not really love their job for whatever reason and want a better lifestyle, better things for their family. That's a pretty good reason. That's based around money. But, you know, strategically, how are you going to get there and when are you going to get there? And particularly if people are looking at extracting themselves from their job, that might be, you know, at the end of the first project, but it might take another second project. So it depends on where people start from, but also, you know, where they're planning to go. But certainly the first thing you need to do is get that first project underway. Because I always say you can't do your second one unless you've got your first. Doesn't mean you can't start your second one while you're doing your first. And that can be a good way to go as well. Even if you could be using investors. It doesn't have to be your money. We know that. My first 2 projects were with investors. I didn't put 5 cents on the table for my first 2 projects. It could be like that. But what is the bigger goal? We often ask people, well, where would you like to be in 2 years? But particularly, where would you like to be in 5? And that could be, well, I've left my job 2 years ago. I'm into my 3rd project. I've really built up some capital. I'm really, you know, enjoying life and I'm going, well, it could be that. That's what you want. So, but for other people, it could be something a bit different.
Yeah, and I think that it's okay to sit down and assess. We did that. I think we talked about this on a podcast or 2 ago, or I talked about it on my podcast. If anyone's into a motivation podcast, jump on mine, Bounce Back Better. What am I promoting for? I'm not. I'm just saying if you're into it, I don't get anything out. I just do it because I love motivating people. But we sat down a couple of weeks ago on a Sunday with a whiteboard and just looked at our strategic plan and we made a couple of changes.
Yeah, we did. And that was a great session because I had some things spinning around in my head. The thing about a plan is you can set a plan, but you have to be adaptable as well.
Yeah.
And since the last time we actually locked a plan in, some things had happened and we have to be a bit more flexible, make a change here or there.
Yeah.
And these things float around in your head as loops, as open loops.
And we had that my development finished over in WA, so it meant we needed to sort of just look at actual outcome, new plan. Yeah.
And so we had that morning. Probably only, how long did it take? An hour and a half, something.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
But we go off track and start talking about health goals and fitness goals and family goals, and here we go in all directions.
It was more about finance, but it ended up being everything, and that's good. That's a holistic view of everything. So
which is a real strategic plan.
It is, yeah, because it's not just about finances, although they're very important. We know that, and so that was a great thing to do, and I recommend that to anybody to get it down. You know, you could say get it down on paper. We'd like to use a whiteboard at the office and we sit back and we sort of ponder and someone goes up there and rubs something out and changes a word or what about this? But if we do that, that could lead to this. Oh, yeah, okay. So, and so that sort of strategic planning, which needs review. I reckon, how often do you think? Twice a year? How often do you review your big plans?
I think we probably should do it more than we do because we probably have been doing it annually and it probably would be better. It actually would be because we both have areas of expertise, and when it comes to finances, I'd listen to yours all day over mine. So, you know, you open my eyes to a world and then I can open your eyes to a world and other things, and we discuss them. It's like, okay, yeah, let's do that. Okay, should we try this? And we actually discuss the whole thing.
Yeah.
But you need to tweak it. So like you say, so maybe twice a year would be a good thing.
Twice would be good. I mean, we even got down to the point of thinking about holidays and when and where, because that is strategic planning, because we have to, you know, if we're going to take time off that requires certain things, not like we're retired and lying on the beach or sitting in the coffee club every morning. You know, our life's not like that. So everything needs a bit of organisation.
As far as coffee clubs go for cafes, Bob, I never go there. I don't know why. Why do I not like their coffee? I don't know what it is.
Let's not knock the coffee club. But
no, I'm not knocking them.
No, I know. I was just saying, like, our life's quite active.
Yeah.
And we love it that way. And so it does need planning.
Oh, it's incredibly busy.
If you were retired, no longer working, like cruising around, probably looking for something to do, that'd be quite different.
No, yeah, we pack a bit in, which is how we both like it. So.
Yeah.
So, Bob, I think we've covered enough today. We've been yarning for a bit. We talked about mitigating risk.
Yeah.
We talked about diversification in area and product and long-term strategic planning.
Yeah, that's a couple of good subjects there. Three.
Yeah, three. So is there anything you'd like to finish with today before we close up episode 144?
No, but I see the wind's getting up, so I'm not sure if I will be going fishing today.
Oh, you're probably right. Although you were watching that fishing show yesterday where a guy caught some massive flathead and we're both like,
he did. That
where
got me
is
fired
that?
up.
Oh, me too. I said, why can't we go there? But we don't know where it was. It was just a YouTube show.
Across the road is a good place from where we live. There's definitely flathead in there.
Well, maybe we'll try that. Anyway, on that note, it's time to consider flathead fishing maybe later in the day. And we'll catch you next week. Bye.
Bye now.